Hello, friends. Have you ever wondered why almost everyone in the world wants to become disciplined, yet most people drift away from their goals within just a few days? Maybe you've also made promises to yourself before, that from now on you'll wake up early every day, study regularly, or maintain a good habit consistently. In the beginning, everything feels easy. For the first few days, motivation feels strong as well. But slowly that motivation begins to fade, and after some time the entire routine falls apart. If this has happened to you, you're not alone. In fact, this is exactly where most people make a mistake. Many people believe that the most important thing for becoming disciplined is motivation. They think that only when they feel motivated will they be able to consistently work toward their goals. But the truth is that motivation is never stable. It comes and goes. Sometimes we feel highly energetic, and sometimes we feel nothing at all. That is why so many people in the world start their goals but fail to maintain them for a long time. And perhaps this is why it is often said that almost 99% of people fail when it comes to discipline. But here a very interesting question arises. If motivation is so unreliable, then how do some people continue working on their goals every single day? How do they maintain their routines for months and even years while others give up within days? Do they have some different kind of motivation, or do they have a secret system that keeps them disciplined? The truth is that disciplined people do not depend on motivation. They work with a system that helps them move forward even when they feel absolutely no motivation. And that is the idea we are going to explore deeply throughout this video. Today, we will explore the ideas from a powerful book that explains how discipline actually works and why most people misunderstand it. The biggest message of this book is very simple but extremely powerful. Waiting for motivation is not necessary to become disciplined. The real question is not when motivation will arrive. The real question is how you can create a system that keeps you consistent every single day. And understanding that system might have the power to change your entire life. But before we get there, we need to understand the biggest mistake people make when they try to become disciplined. And this is where the entire journey truly begins. Because when people try to become disciplined, they often place all their hope on motivation. They believe that if they can just motivate themselves more, everything will work out. At the beginning, this approach even seems to work. For a few days, there is energy, focus, and visible progress. But slowly something strange starts happening. The same task that once felt easy suddenly begins to feel heavy. Waking up early becomes difficult. Concentrating on study or work becomes harder. And the habits you promised to maintain slowly start weakening. This is the moment when most people begin to think that something is wrong with them. They start blaming themselves. They feel that maybe they are not strong enough, or that they lack the willpower that successful people seem to have. But the truth is that the problem is not your lack of willpower. The problem lies in the way we understand discipline. Since childhood, we have been told that if we want to achieve something, we simply need to motivate ourselves. But the human mind does not work like that. Our brain always searches for the easiest path. It naturally gravitates toward comfort and tries to avoid effort. That is why when a task starts feeling difficult, our mind immediately begins looking for easier options. Sometimes we reach for our phone, sometimes we open social media, and sometimes we simply postpone our goals. Gradually, these small delays begin forming a pattern. At first we say, "Not today, I'll start tomorrow." Then, tomorrow the same thing happens again. And after some time, we begin to feel that discipline might simply not be possible for us. But here is something very interesting that most people fail to notice. There are people in the world who follow almost the same routine every single day. They are human just like us. They face the same distractions, the same emotions, and the same challenges that everyone else faces. Yet they continue working on their goals consistently. So the question is, what is different about them? Are they always motivated? Do they never feel tired or bored? Or have they discovered a different way of understanding discipline? The truth is that disciplined people do not rely on motivation. They know that motivation is never stable. That is why they do not leave their behavior in the hands of motivation. Instead, they build a system that helps them take action consistently, regardless of how they feel at that moment. And this is the point where the real journey of understanding discipline begins. But before we go further, we need to understand another major misconception. The misunderstanding that stops almost everyone from building discipline. And if you understand this one idea, your entire perspective on discipline might completely change. And this is exactly where most people fall into the biggest misunderstanding about discipline. Since childhood, many of us have been taught the same idea. If you want to achieve something big, just keep motivating yourself. Books, speeches, and social media often repeat the same message. Motivation is a key to success. But if you observe carefully, you will notice a strange pattern. Motivation often arrives very quickly and disappears just as quickly. Sometimes we watch an inspiring video and suddenly feel extremely motivated. In that moment, it feels like everything is going to change. We make plans, write down our goals, and promise ourselves that from now on we will stay completely disciplined. But within a few days, that same energy disappears, and the same cycle begins again. We think we just need a little more motivation. But the truth is that motivation does not work like a reliable engine. It works more like an emotional spark, something that excites us for a short time but cannot sustain us for long. That is why many people keep starting again and again, but struggle to remain consistent. In reality, the human mind follows an interesting rule. Our brain naturally moves toward tasks that are easy, comfortable, and give immediate satisfaction. Discipline, on the other hand, is usually connected to actions that feel difficult at the beginning and whose results do not appear immediately. So when motivation fades, the mind immediately begins searching for alternatives. Sometimes we say we will rest for today. Sometimes we say we will start when the mood feels right. And sometimes we simply postpone our goals. Slowly, this delay becomes a habit. And this is the point where many people conclude that discipline might simply not be possible for them. But there is one very important truth we must understand here. Discipline is not the result of motivation. In fact, motivation is often the result of discipline. This means that when we take small actions consistently through a system, progress slowly begins to appear, and that progress itself becomes a new source of motivation. In other words, the real secret of discipline is not finding motivation. The real secret is creating an environment and a system that helps you take action regardless of how you feel. And that is the central idea on which this entire book is built. This book tries to show that disciplined people do not depend on motivation. They control their behavior through systems. But here another interesting question arises. If discipline is not built through motivation, then what actually builds it? Is there a framework that can help us stay consistent even when our mood or motivation changes every day? And this is where the most powerful idea of the book appears. This is the moment where the real door to understanding discipline begins to open. Because if motivation is not reliable, then it means we must rely on something else. Something that is not driven by emotions, but by structure. And this is where the book introduces a very powerful idea. The idea is simple, but extremely effective. Disciplined people do not rely on motivation. They control their behavior through systems. At first, this idea may sound a little strange, because we often associate discipline with willpower. We believe that disciplined people possess some extraordinary mental strength. But when we observe real-life examples, we discover something surprising. The greatest strength of disciplined people is not their willpower, it is their system. A system simply means a structure that repeatedly helps you take the right action. Imagine two people who want to start exercising every day. The first person waits for motivation. If their mood is good, they work out. If their mood is not right, they tell themselves they will start tomorrow. The second person approaches it differently. They do not rely on motivation. Instead, they design their day in a way where exercise is already part of their routine. Their environment is also organized so that working out becomes easier. For example, their workout clothes are already prepared, the time for exercise is fixed, and their day begins with that activity. Slowly, this routine stops being a decision and becomes an automatic behavior. That is the power of a system. A system removes a need to make the same decision again and again, because the truth is that every decision consumes mental energy. And when we repeatedly decide whether to work or not, the mind usually chooses the easier option. But when a system is already in place, taking action becomes much easier. That is why disciplined people do not leave their behavior in the hands of emotions. They organize their surroundings, routines, and habits in a way that makes the right action easier and the wrong action slightly harder. Over time, these small systems build consistency, and consistency is what eventually becomes discipline. But here another important question appears. If systems are so powerful, why do most people fail to create them? What exactly stops people from building the right systems for themselves? To answer this question, we must understand another important aspect of discipline, an aspect deeply connected to our daily environment and habits. And this is where another important aspect of discipline begins to appear: your environment. Many people believe that discipline is purely the result of inner strength. They think that if their mindset becomes strong enough, they will be able to ignore any distraction. But when we observe human behavior carefully, a different truth becomes visible. Our environment influences our actions far more than we often realize. In reality, our brain is deeply affected by the things that surround us. The objects we repeatedly see, the situations we stay in, and the signals present in our environment gradually begin shaping our behavior. For example, imagine someone who wants to focus on studying, but around them there are constant distractions, phone notifications, social media, or other things that immediately grab attention. In such an environment, staying disciplined becomes extremely difficult. This does not mean that the person lacks willpower. The real problem is that their environment is working against their goals. Now imagine a different situation. If the same person slightly changes their study environment by keeping the phone away while studying, reducing distractions, and creating a space where focus becomes easier, the same task suddenly begins to feel more manageable. This is the principle that disciplined people understand very well. They do not only work on their mindset, they also design their environment in a way that makes the right actions easier to take. This idea is powerful because the human brain naturally chooses the easier path. If the right behavior becomes easier and the wrong behavior slightly harder, good habits gradually begin to form. That is why disciplined people carefully arrange their surroundings. If they want to read, they keep books visible. If they want to exercise, they prepare their workout gear in advance. If they want to reduce distractions, they remove the things from their environment that might pull their attention away. Over time, these small changes create a very big difference. Because when the environment is supportive, discipline no longer requires constant effort. Taking action begins to feel natural. But here another interesting question appears. If the environment is so powerful, can discipline be built simply by changing the environment? Or is there another deeper principle that helps people remain consistent over the long term? The answer to this question appears in the next important lesson of discipline, one that explains how small actions slowly transform into big changes. And this is where the second major principle of discipline emerges: the power of small but consistent actions. Often when people think about becoming disciplined, they make a big mistake. They try to start with a massive change. They believe that if they want to transform their life, they must suddenly work extremely hard, create a long routine, or change everything in a single day. At first, this idea feels very exciting. But human behavior works according to a different rule. When we place too much pressure on ourselves, the mind eventually begins trying to escape that pressure. This is why many ambitious plans collapse within just a few days. Disciplined people take a different approach. Instead of beginning with huge changes, they start with small actions. Small actions are powerful because they are easy to begin. And when something is easy to start, it also becomes easier to continue. For example, imagine someone who wants to build a habit of reading every day. If they decide from the beginning that they must read for 2 hours daily, that routine may soon begin to feel overwhelming. But if the same person starts by reading for just 10 minutes, the habit is far more likely to last. Gradually, those 10 minutes may become 20 minutes, then 30 minutes, and eventually even more. These small steps slowly build a strong routine. This principle works because the human brain loves progress. When we feel that we are consistently moving forward, the mind wants to repeat that behavior. That is why disciplined people focus on consistency, not perfection. For them, the most important thing is to take a small action every single day. Because when small actions are repeated consistently, they gradually turn into habits. And once habits are formed, maintaining discipline becomes much easier. This is where discipline takes on an interesting form. At the beginning, discipline requires conscious effort. We have to remind ourselves and push ourselves. But as habits grow stronger, those same actions slowly become automatic. And when behavior becomes automatic, maintaining it becomes far easier. That is why disciplined people rely on small, consistent actions rather than dramatic, sudden changes. But here another deeper question appears. If habits are so powerful, why do some habits last for a long time while others break quickly? Are small actions alone enough? Or is there another psychological factor behind it? The answer lies in the third and perhaps the most important lesson of discipline: the way our identity shapes our behavior.
And this is where the third, and perhaps the deepest, aspect of discipline begins to appear: the power of identity. We often believe that our behavior is created by our actions. But many times, the truth is actually the opposite. Our actions often emerge from the identity we believe about ourselves. In simple terms, we repeatedly do the things that match the identity we have created for ourselves. If someone believes that they are a lazy person, their actions will usually follow that belief. They might start new habits, but maintaining them for a long time becomes difficult because an old identity in their mind keeps pulling them back. But if that same person gradually begins changing their mindset and starts seeing themselves as a disciplined individual, their behavior also begins to change. This is the real meaning of an identity shift. Disciplined people do not only try to change their actions, they slowly change their identity. For example, when someone begins exercising daily, at first they simply see themselves as a person trying to exercise. But when they maintain the habit consistently, a new identity slowly forms in their mind. They start seeing themselves as someone who takes care of their health. In the same way, when someone builds a habit of reading every day, over time they begin to see themselves as a learner. These small identity shifts create a powerful transformation, because once our identity changes, our behavior begins trying to protect and maintain that identity. If you believe that you are a disciplined person, your mind will naturally begin choosing actions that strengthen that identity. This is why many people start habits but fail to maintain them for a long time. They try to change their actions, but never change their identity. Disciplined people understand this process differently. They know that every small action shapes their identity. When you work with focus for a single day, you are not just completing a task. You are also sending a signal to your mind that you are a disciplined person. When you repeat a small habit consistently, you are strengthening not only your behavior, but also your identity. Gradually, that identity begins guiding your actions. And this is the point where discipline stops being a struggle and becomes a natural behavior. But this leads to another important question. If environment, small habits, and identity are such powerful elements of discipline, can they be combined into a system that helps us stay consistent over the long term? This is where the next and most practical part of discipline begins, a framework that turns these ideas into a workable system. At this stage, discipline stops being just an idea and begins to become a practical structure. Because by now we have understood three important things. First, our environment influences our behavior. Second, small, consistent actions slowly turn into habits. Third, our identity shapes our actions. But real transformation happens when these three elements begin working together. This is the point where disciplined people start thinking differently from others. They do not see discipline as an emotional decision. They design it as a system. A system where the right actions become easier and the wrong actions become slightly harder. For example, if someone's goal is to read daily, they do not simply say, "I should read." They organize their environment and routine around that goal. They place a book somewhere they will see it every day. They choose a fixed time when reading becomes part of their routine. Gradually, this routine stops being a decision and becomes a pattern. That is the system of discipline. This system works because the human brain naturally chooses the easiest path. If the right behavior becomes easier, the mind automatically starts moving in that direction. That is why disciplined people design their environments and routines in such a way that they do not have to constantly push themselves. They do not have to repeatedly decide whether they should work or not. Their system already makes that decision for them. And this reduces something called decision fatigue. Decision fatigue happens when we make too many decisions throughout the day. Gradually, our mental energy decreases, and the mind begins choosing the easiest and most comfortable options. But when routines are already decided, the need for decision-making decreases. And this makes discipline much easier to sustain. Over time, this system creates consistency. Consistency strengthens habits. Strong habits begin transforming identity. And when identity changes, discipline becomes a natural behavior. In other words, the entire process works like a circle. Environment makes actions easier. Actions turn into habits. Habits shape identity. And identity begins guiding actions again. This is the hidden structure of a disciplined life. But another important question now appears. If someone truly adopts this system, what kind of transformation can happen in their life? Can discipline really transform a person's entire life? And understanding this is the next, and perhaps the most inspiring, part of this journey.
And this is where the most inspiring aspect of discipline begins to appear. Because when a person gradually turns their environment, habits, and identity into a system, the impact does not remain limited to just one small habit. Slowly, that system begins influencing their entire life. At the beginning, the changes seem very small. Maybe you start waking up a little earlier each day. Maybe you begin working with focus for a short period of time daily. Or maybe you develop the habit of reading a few pages every day. At first glance, these small changes may not seem very significant, but over time, these same small actions become the starting point of a much bigger transformation. Because the real impact of discipline does not appear immediately, it accumulates slowly. Imagine someone who spends just 30 minutes every day learning or reading. In a single day, it does not feel like a huge effort, but if that same habit continues for months and years, those 30 minutes can turn into thousands of hours of knowledge. This principle works in almost every area of life. If you try to become just a little better every day, over time your skill level, your confidence, and even your mindset begin to change. Gradually you start noticing that things which once felt difficult now begin to feel easier. Your focus improves. Your consistency becomes stronger. And most importantly, you begin to trust yourself. This trust is extremely powerful because when a person begins to feel that they can follow through on their decisions, a new level of confidence develops within them. They begin taking their goals more seriously. And slowly that confidence starts appearing in other areas of life as well. That is why disciplined people often keep progressing in their careers, health, learning, and personal growth. They are not perfect. They face the same distractions that everyone else faces. The only difference is that they have learned to organize their behavior through systems. And when a person learns to control their actions, their direction in life slowly begins to change as well. That is the true power of discipline. It does not change you overnight, but it keeps making you slightly better every single day. And over time, those small improvements can create an entirely different life. But there is one final and very important point left to understand. If discipline is so powerful, where should it actually begin? Is there a simple starting point from which anyone can begin this journey? This is the question that the final part of the discussion answers. And this is where the most practical lesson of the entire discussion appears. If we look carefully at this whole journey, discipline is not some sudden power that appears overnight. It is not created in a single day, and it does not come only from motivation. Discipline develops gradually. It begins with small actions, turns into habits, and slowly becomes an identity that guides your behavior. This means you do not need to change your entire life in one single day in order to become disciplined. This is where most people make their mistake. They think that if they want to become disciplined, everything must become perfect starting tomorrow morning. A strict routine, many new habits, and a completely transformed lifestyle. But human behavior does not work like that. When we put too much pressure on ourselves, the mind often tries to escape that pressure. That is why discipline always begins with small and simple actions. Maybe with one small habit. Maybe with just a few focused minutes in a day. Or maybe with a single decision that today you will complete one important task. Gradually, these small decisions create a pattern. And when that pattern repeats consistently, it slowly becomes a strong routine. That routine eventually turns into discipline. And then a point arrives when discipline is no longer a struggle. It becomes part of your identity. This is the most powerful message of the entire book. Discipline is not a rare talent that only a few special people possess. It is a process that anyone can understand and gradually apply in their life. The beginning may be small, but the impact can be enormous. Because when a person learns to control their actions, they slowly learn to control their direction in life as well. And perhaps that is a skill that matters most when it comes to achieving any goal. If you gained a new understanding about discipline from this video, or if any part of this discussion made you reflect, feel free to share in the comments what has been the biggest challenge for you when it comes to discipline. And if you enjoy deep book summaries and self-improvement ideas like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can easily receive upcoming videos. Because sometimes a single small idea can change both our thinking and our direction. And perhaps this is exactly where your own discipline journey can begin.